Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends joining us from both I believe, the Mountain and Pacific time zones. My name is Michael Lipinski, and I'll be one of your speakers today for this webinar. And as folks are joining us, I have been thinking that since we have multiple time zones, I was trying to figure out if it was good morning or good afternoon, and that we just recently last week switched to standard time, everyone. I thought maybe we could start with an icebreaker by polling the audience on the value of daylight saving time and which is better, daylight saving time or standard time. But I'm just kidding. We have a much more exciting topic to cover, information blocking. But really, the exciting topic is information sharing. And that's what the information blocking regulations really do. They enable information sharing. And we'll go through that today, how that can occur through the provisions of information blocking. So today is the second webinar in our series of webinars designed to help one particular set of actors, healthcare providers, better understand the information blocking regulations. But please wait. If you're not one of them, and there is actually a fact sheet on our website to help you to determine if you're a healthcare provider. But even if you're not one of them, after you look at that fact sheet, please don't disconnect from this webinar. The information we're going to provide today will be helpful to all those subject to the information blocking regulation, which would be developers of certified health IT, health information networks, health information exchanges, as well as those that aren't subject to it, but can benefit from the information blocking regulations. And honestly, many of those that are subject to the information blocking regulation, and we'll talk a little bit about this as well today, are going to benefit from the regulations. For example, small physician practice groups. And so I just want to start with a refresher. The purpose of these webinars is to provide an overview of information blocking, also to highlight key considerations for actors covered by information blocking. It's also to what I'll call address issues of the day. So that could be whether we've issued recent frequently asked questions or other educational resources, or we've received some recent questions from stakeholders that we wanted to respond to via a broader audience. And then as always, these webinars will help highlight the benefits of information sharing as supported by the information blocking regulations. So again, as I mentioned, this is the second webinar. The first was an overview of information blocking, essentially like a 101. It was held on September 14th, and the recording is available on our website with the slides today. You can find them. And then today's webinar is actually part one of multiple webinars that will cover the information blocking exceptions. It is, you may have got a notice already if you've joined us that the webinar will be recorded. We will not be taking live questions, but you're welcome to submit questions through the Q&A feature, which is enabled for this presentation. We're going to do our best during the webinar. We have some colleagues on who will try to answer your questions through the Q&A. However, I do want to mention that we will have another Ask ONC about information sharing on December 10th. So you can join that. We first held one on September 24th, and it was both well attended and beneficial to those who attended based on the feedback we received. So I encourage you to attend that Q&A Ask ONC session if possible. So with that, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so as an attorney, I have told folks that it would be fine to put this material in 4-point font and just move on. But since they didn't listen to me, you can read everything here for yourself on this slide. I think the main takeaway is we're going to try our best today to present accurate information, but sometimes we misspeak. So please remember the official provisions and requirements are found in 45 CFR Part 171. Next slide, please. So I'm on the right there, and I'm going to be joined today shortly by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Tom Keane, to help me present today's material and probably inevitably scold me for either using legal terms or something overly vague or non-committal. But in all seriousness, I personally want to thank Tom for the perspective and expertise he provides that helps all of us here at ONC better convey the information blocking goals and expectations to our healthcare provider community and really to all stakeholders. And in this regard, I thought it was appropriate, or we thought it was appropriate, to recognize the whole clinical team that contributes to this effort. So next slide, please. So my colleagues listed on this slide, led by Dr. Tom Mason, have been constantly engaging with clinicians in the healthcare provider community to get a better sense of the issues you are facing when implementing the information blocking regulations. And we wanted to acknowledge their efforts and, more importantly, let you clinicians know that your perspectives, concerns, and questions are being both represented by these clinicians and also brought back by them to ONC for full consideration. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our national coordinator, Miki Trapathi, for some introductory remarks before we dive into the details of today's webinar. Miki?
Great, thanks, Mike, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're deeply appreciative that all of you have joined. And I'm going to be brief, but just want to cover some highlights about the information sharing regulations that come from the 21st Century Cures Act, and then really just welcome you and turn it over to Mike and the team. Information sharing is really important. I think, as all of us know, the Cures Act, from which everything that we're going to talk about derives, was passed in 2016 with immense bipartisan support, as well as widespread support from the healthcare community. I think, as we know, information sharing promotes better, more coordinated care by ensuring complete and up-to-date information that's readily available. And when health data is stored electronically, clinicians are right to expect to be able to access that data when they need it from other clinicians and others who are participating in the care of their patients. The information sharing regulations, I think, also empower clinicians to be able to strengthen the ability of patients to participate directly in their own care, which, as we know, is the driver of better health outcomes, and to help patients better understand how to be able to access their own information to be able to participate more directly in their care as well. So I think that from the information sharing provisions, there's a lot of good that comes from that, and we want to be able to get that going as quickly as possible so that we can get the benefits on behalf of patients as well as providers who are providing that care. The healthcare is the most complex part of the economy, I mean, bar none. It is unbelievably fragmented. It is highly complex, and just medical care itself is highly complex because individuals are highly complex. And medicine is ever evolving, and it's just a highly complex endeavor in general. And so that means that we wanted to make sure, and the law does this, and the ONC regulations do this. We want to make sure that there is flexibility to accommodate individual circumstances, because we recognize that that healthcare varies tremendously across the country. It varies by setting, it varies geographically, it varies by patient population. And so there's a tremendous amount of heterogeneity. And that's why the rules very explicitly allow for exceptions. So there are 8 exceptions that we'll describe in further detail that provide some reasonable practices that allow the flexibility where it may not be appropriate to share information. And those exceptions build in flexibility to accommodate that wide range of systems and circumstances which clinicians and other healthcare providers use to serve your patients. Furthermore, the enforcement part of this is case by case. By design, it's case by case. Again, making sort of clear and recognizing that individual circumstances matter. In healthcare in particular, individual circumstances matter because every single situation is different. So we just want to make sure that you have a full understanding of the flexibility that is baked into these regulations, and you have a very good understanding of how to apply those appropriately. And that's what a lot of, sort of all the information and education outreach that we're doing is geared toward helping you as clinicians and as providers have a better understanding of that. One of the things that I wanted to just talk about in closing before turning it back over to the team is, again, just to thank you in advance for joining the webinar today. And I really, really hope that it's going to be useful to you. We're going to be covering FAQs as well as other information. And this process that we're in, which is all the various channels that we have for communicating with all the stakeholders about the regulations, is very much a feature and not a bug of the process, precisely because of what I described before, that healthcare is unbelievably complex. And so these regulations, are regulations that we want to be able to continuously have discussions and to understand the difficulties, understand problems that you may be encountering in interpreting different things, or where we can clarify things to be able to provide that kind of clarity so that you have a better understanding of it. And that's, as I said, is very much a feature of the regulatory process in the US. It's not a bug of the process. So we very much welcome your engagement and your further engagement. Your questions and comments and concerns are what help us provide you with better information. So we also try to be extremely, extremely responsive to your questions to the best of our abilities, and we work really, really hard to do that. And everyone who's listed in that slide before, in the clinical team and the regulatory team, does a tremendous amount of work to be as responsive as we can. I do want to make sure that you have an understanding of what is behind that process. Every single FAQ that we get, every single thing that you're going to see today, and in everything that we put out, is not only sort of vetted within ONC by all the ONC specialists as well as lawyers. We've got plenty of lawyers in the ONC staff, but it's also reviewed by the HHS Office of General Counsel. It's reviewed by the HHS Office of Inspector General, and as applicable, it's reviewed by the HHS Office of Civil Rights, which regulates HIPAA. So there is a process that we go through for every single piece of information that we put out to market. So that's one of the constraints, but also one of the benefits, I think, of the information that you end up seeing, is that it's been through a process of making sure that what we're saying and what we're putting out is aligned with the law and is consistent with what the law and the regulations allow. And then we take the further step as best as we can to try to put this in plain English terms as well. And that's perhaps the hardest thing that we try to do here. So we want to make sure, it's obviously got to be accurate. This is compliance after all. These are real regulations, and compliance is very important. So compliance officers and lawyers have to be able to understand it. But it's also very important to do everything we can to make to communicate in an intuitive, plain English way as well. So, we try very hard to do that as well. I'm sure that we don't hit the mark as often as we'd like on that score. And we very much welcome your feedback. So, we're always striving to do better. Please let us know if you find this useful, and if you have any feedback for us on how we can communicate better, because as I said, we're always striving to do better, and we're working very hard at it. So thank you again in advance for your participation in this webinar. And let me turn it back to Mike and the team.
Thank you, Miki. All right, let's move on to the next slide and jump in. So with these first two slides, we're going to take a step back in a sense and quickly go over what the Cures Act provided related to information blocking, and then also on the next slide, the information blocking definition. And we're doing this since today's presentation isn't going to be a 101. These slides will hopefully give you all a foundation for the more discrete topics we are going to discuss today. And going back to one point that Miki made, because I looked this up last night actually, about the Cures Act being overwhelmingly bipartisan legislation. So at the time, it was a Republican Congress. And when we'd say overwhelmingly, it was in the House, the vote was 392 to 26 in favor of the legislation. And in the Senate, it was 94 to 5 with one abstaining. And then it was signed into law by President Obama on December 13, 2016. So for me personally, I take pride, and it's a privilege to have the ability to implement these statutory provisions. So we can move to the next slide. So again, as a foundation, here is the definition in the regulations of information blocking. We're going to hit on some of these topics, particularly EHI and then obviously the exceptions. What you should take from this Slido is, the box on the right, which is the elements of information blocking, to know that, generally what they all are, and that it's not, and we'll talk more about, like I said, some of the exceptions in EHI. The one thing looking at those elements remind me that I should mention, I think it was yesterday, we released a blog from our Deputy National Coordinator, Steve Posnack, and that's going to be one of the ways that Miki mentioned that we're going to communicate to you. And that blog focused on how the intersection of other laws with information blocking and how that relates either to required by law, how it relates to whether or not there's an interference, and even whether an exception could apply. So I encourage you to read that blog. And again, there'll be more blogs in the future on topics related to information blocking. So let's move to the next slide. So I'm just going to read actually from this slide and to emphasize what we're going to go over today. So we're going to talk about what we call exceptions, which in the statute, as you saw, are reasonable and necessary activities that need to be identified by the secretary that would not constitute information blocking. We're going to kind of use a Q&A approach, with my colleague, Dr. Keane, about how an exception may apply under a circumstance, and we'll rely on some of those FAQs we just issued. Eventually, once we get through that and a discussion of EHI as well, we'll talk about a couple common misconceptions that we've heard and try to address through FAQs. And then Tom's going to talk to you more about one of the key point about the regulations was, why information sharing matters and how it can be utilized, this regulation, to achieve it. And then lastly, I'm going to come back and talk to you a bit about how to report a claim of information blocking or ask a question, and then how we initially process those claims when they come in. And then lastly, we'll talk about where to find a lot of this information, and then when more will be coming out and so forth. So with that, let's jump into some more of the substantive content. So next slide, please. Okay, so a lot of this is pulling information from what's called the preamble of our rules. So from the final rule and even the proposed rule that established the information blocking regulations. So and you'll see this on the next slide, but these are generally the goal, how they fit, how the exceptions fit, that is on the next slide. But on the left here, you have what generally were the goals we were trying to achieve with the exceptions. So that's confidence in the health IT infrastructure. So that's, protecting privacy and security of EHI and patient safety. There are other ones with the actual infrastructure itself, an exception that focuses on that. We also wanted to promote competition and innovation. So there are exceptions that focus on that. And then being ONC, we obviously wanted to focus on standardization and interoperability of EHI. And so then when we had those goals, what we did with the exceptions, and again, this is a little bit foundational, is we tried to make sure we put parameters, which generally are called conditions in the exceptions, to make sure that there were guardrails in how they were used, and they were used for that specific purpose. So like narrowly focused on that actual topic to use the exception, whether it's privacy or security, use certain terms about characterizing the risk, and other things that you'll hear a lot throughout when we start talking about like being non-discriminatory and using objective criteria, things of that nature, to make sure that the exceptions weren't abused and or were used in a way that was pretextual for a way to block information. So let's jump to the next slide. And so now I'm gonna quickly, I think having talked through that, you can see where obviously there's a specific privacy and security and harm exception, and those are gonna fit under that health IT infrastructure. So does the health IT performance exception. Your fees and licensing exceptions fit under the innovation and competition one. And then you have for example, your content and manner exception that's highly focused on a standardized approach and interoperability in making EHI available. I think, the other thing that I would want to draw your attention to are two things. One, the ones in red will be the ones, or a burnt orange, I don't know what it is, red, I think. Those will be the ones we're going to try to talk about today. And we're not going to talk about them in detail, like every single provision and every condition and every requirement. We're going to try to, like I said, do it through a Q&A of when one might be the appropriate one, or the intent behind when you would use that exception. And the other thing you should notice here is the exceptions kind of fall in two categories. The first category on your left are where you're going to be using an exception not to provide any access, exchange, or use. And then on your right are categories where you're going to actually be providing the EHI, but under certain conditions. And with that, let's jump to the next slide. Another bit of a disclaimer here. Like I said, there'll be real world examples via questions. And really what you need to take away from this slide, besides the fact that at the very bottom there, it identifies who are actors, and there are definitions for actors in the reg and discussed in other slides. And I mentioned the fact sheet you can look at for a healthcare provider as well, that's on our website. But what you really need to take away from this is info blocking was set up to be assessed on a case-by-case fact-specific basis. And you'll see that disclaimer on some of the other slides as well. So, and we're really not in a position to have all the facts to give a definitive answer, nor are we in a position to opine on whether something constitutes information blocking, even under a full set of facts. However, I think what you need to know, and there's a corollary point also on the next slide about this, is even if you don't meet an exception, it doesn't mean you've committed information blocking. So let's go to the next slide for two important points as well. So that one is, like I just said, the failure to meet exception doesn't mean that you have committed information blocking. And that's what I've been trying to point out as we've gone through so far. There are elements to information blocking beyond whether or not you meet an exception. So for example, you need to have the requisite knowledge. And so if you're a healthcare provider, that means you have to know two things. You have to know that it was an interference. So that means it interfered with, materially discouraged, or prevented access, exchange, or use. And you had to know that that was unreasonable, your practice. So you need to know that. And then whatever you did, your practice actually has to rise to the level that meets the definition of an interference under the regulations. So please keep that in mind. The other point worth mentioning is it's important to document if you're going to take in an exception. We mentioned that throughout the rule, but we don't specify a form or format how you do that. We've really left it up to the actors as to how much they feel they need to document and how they document that. So please keep that in mind as well. And with that, I think we're going to start talking about the exceptions, and let's move there. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in here. My name, again, to introduce myself, is Tom Keane. Before I came into government, I had been a practicing interventional radiologist for more than a decade. And today, in the Q&A between Mike and I am going to play the role of the doctor, and Mike is going to play the role of the lawyer. And I'm very excited that for once the shoe is on the other foot and a doctor gets to pepper a lawyer with questions. My bosses turned down my request that I get paid $400 an hour for doing so, but I am still going to make the most of this. So my first question to you, Mike, is if a patient requests their electronic health information, is it sufficient to provide them with a PDF copy?
Well, Tom,
or when is it sufficient?
In a very lawyerly response, I'm going to say it depends. But actually, I'm going to give you a lot more than that in terms of response here. But I do want to mention, again, on the right there, you'll see some key points and provisions about this exception, right? So the PDF question that you've just asked comes into play if you either technically are unable to provide the EHI in the way that they've requested it, or you couldn't reach agreeable terms, because we've established this exception to allow for access to EHI, exchange and use of it on market terms. And if that can't happen, we set up an alternative manner approach. And so your question comes into play when you're in the alternative manner, which has an order of priority. And I alluded to earlier, is the standard, focusing on standards first, certified health IT, then on standards, and ultimately on what is called machine readable format, if neither of the other ways could be provided. The other thing that I think sometimes gets lost with this exception I've seen is it has to be agreed to by the requester. So we're going to take in this instance that the requester did say I wanted it in PDF, and that's how we got to this point. And for the PDF to be appropriate under this exception, it should be interpretable, and it should be essentially machine readable output, right? So for some PDF, that's not going to be the case. For example, EHIs as images, all right? Those generally might not be interpretable or machine readable output. But what I can say is one way a PDF could be machine readable format would be if it was structured so that data is conveyed, it could be consumed by another software program, would be using consistent processing logic. And that would be consistent with NIST, or the National Institute for Standards Technology definition of machine readable. So if you're going the PDF route, I would strongly encourage you to keep that in mind, that it really needs to be interpretable and a machine readable output. And normally images aren't going to meet that standard.
Okay, Mike, thanks. That's a question we hear a lot from providers in the field. So I'm going to hit you with another one that we hear a lot. If a patient requests EHI in electronic form and I don't have an EHR, what does the regulation say about that?
Okay, so just for our audience awareness, these aren't FAQs. So we've tried to label the questions that are FAQs, and they're really all the ones we're going to be talking about today that are FAQs are new FAQs we've just issued in the past couple days. But this is, like you said, a relevant question. And let me quickly go over the infeasibility exception in a very high level. It really consists of 3 conditions. There's like circumstances we would call uncontrollable events. I'll talk about that last. There's circumstances where it's a segmentation issue. And that's, I see your second question on the screen. So that's where we're going to get into that. But this question you've just asked actually implicates the third part of the infeasibility exception, which is infeasibility under circumstances. And this exception is, remember, all the exceptions are established to address all issues for actors. So the actors, we have a broad scope of actors that are covered by information blocking. Like I mentioned earlier, health information networks, exchanges, developers of certified health IT, and then really the broadest category is healthcare providers, which can be providers that are hospitals, large hospital systems that are using certified health IT, to small practices in rural areas that, in this case, with this question, don't have an EHR, or even long-term post-acute care setting where they don't have potentially an EHR. But as this question says, if it's EHI, so that just means it has to be in electronic format. And in certain cases, PDF is at least EHI. It may not be machine readable, but it is EHI. So here, really, it's a test under the circumstances. And you're looking at certain factors, and these factors are outlined in the reg. But they want to look at, what type of EHI are we talking about here? The purpose for which it's needed. So is it needed for treatment, for example? what would be the cost to the actor to comply? So in this case, if I don't have any EHR and they're asking it in some type of, I don't know, an API approach or something, or then, what's the cost to me to try to establish that? And that includes also whatever financial and technical resources that are available to you. And you can see that these factors can be applied in all those settings I just mentioned. You can apply these factors for small healthcare practice or for a large healthcare system. And we obviously know that the factors are going to turn differently for them, right? If it's a large healthcare system in terms of resources and finances. But quickly, a couple other factors, they have to be non-discriminatory in how they do this. So if they provide this data in a different, to all their customers or partners, but then they're not providing it to this request, then that's going to weigh against them, right? And then, it also looks at what we just talked about, content and manner, and why you couldn't have done it through one of those options. Because if you have the EHI, maybe you can provide it in a machine readable format, but maybe you weren't able to take advantage of that exception because the patient, in this case, wouldn't agree with it. So bottom line is this exception has been established to address these type of situations that you raised, but it also, there isn't a definitive answer based on just the information we have in this question, because it looks at a host of factors I just talked about, Tom.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Now, let me go on to another real-world type situation that we hear a lot about. Let's say that you have a adolescent patient, and she has juvenile diabetes, and her parents request the EHI in order to help manage the juvenile diabetes. But mixed in with her medical records is information about oral contraceptive pills that she's been prescribed. And she would prefer her parents not to know that she's taking oral contraceptive pills, and you're aware of this. And there's no way for you to segment out the information on the juvenile diabetes from the information on her reproductive history. What do you do in a situation like this? What does the regulation prescribe?
So, yeah, Tom, when you first, mentioned this question, I thought it was a great question, because this is probably what our listeners, clinicians, healthcare providers are really dealing with on a day-to-day basis. A very more complex situation, could even get more complex as to why, the patient didn't want to share it, right? We didn't really, other than we know he doesn't want to, he or she doesn't want to reveal it. We don't really know the intent behind that. But there's an important point already on the screen here, and that's that in the state, they've reached the age of consent. So under which we're not talking about really today, but the privacy exception, it allows an actor not to share EHI based on a patient or individual's wishes, right? So you're taking that into consideration, you're looking at this, but this patient, this adolescent, says only certain information I don't want to have shared. So that doesn't necessarily apply to all this information, but what we're hearing here is there's no way to electronic segment it. And what the infeasibility exception allows for then is that if you can't unambiguously segment the requested EHI from the other, you can take advantage of this exception. So hopefully that's helpful to folks who may be dealing with a very similar situation. I know I've heard it more than once, so I'm sure they are. There's not a question on the slide about what I'm about to mention, but I've heard it. I think others have heard it, in dealings with stakeholders. So I think it's worth mentioning. And it's about that third condition, the uncontrollable events, which in legal terms are sometimes called in contracts force majeure. And those are like military acts, natural disasters, and even public health emergencies. So I've received the question, oh, there's a public health emergency right now for the COVID-19 pandemic. So I can use that condition, right? Not to make EHI accessible or for use or exchange. And that's not quite how it works. And we've tried to highlight bold font on the screen. It has to be due to that public health emergency. So the actor needs to establish a causal connection between why they can't provide it and the public health emergency. Because as Miki mentioned earlier on, like just as an example, having this information during, like, for example, immunization records during the public health emergency would have been probably very valuable. And we heard that in some comments on our interim final rule in terms of when we delayed the applicability date of information blocking. So I wanted to just touch on that quickly because I've heard it, and this would seem like a good opportunity to mention it. So Tom, back to you.
Okay, thanks. So we've talked about infeasibility here. Let's talk a little bit about fees. So if one of my patients asked me to provide a copy of his medical record on paper or on a USB device or on a CD, can I charge that patient a fee for the service? We hear this quite a bit from the community.
So on this one right here, this question, I can actually start off by telling you yes, under the information blocking regulations. And the information, like, so just to try to give you a real quick background on how this fees exception works is that we, interpretation of the info blocking definition said that any fee could be an interference, but obviously certain fees should be able to be charged in certain situations. So we created the fees exception, but then we went in very detail about what type of fees could be charged and then what fees could not be charged for. So essentially excluded. And then the patient situation is even more unique under the fees exception. So as you see in the headline, you're probably like, okay, wait, reasonable profit margin too. That doesn't apply to the patient situation. So we've got generally the two patient situations on the screen here. One, I'm just gonna let you read, which is the not covered one, and that's about electronic access. But in this case, we're talking about, one, I just want to confirm, and it's in our, more elaborated on in our FAQ, but if you're talking about EHI, it doesn't matter what form or format they're asking for it. You are within scope of the information blocking regulations. So what we've talked about, in the rule is, both about manual effort, and there can be a charge about manual effort, but also we aligned this exception with the HIPAA rules, in particular, the HIPAA privacy rules, individual right of access. So I believe that is, and again, this is why we have our disclaimer. I think it's 45 CFR 164 524 C4. So that provision lays out what what category of fees can be charged for. And so we've essentially said any fees that are beyond those categories would be prohibited under the information blocking regulation. What we haven't said, is specify what is actual reasonable fee under this. So, for example, I've also heard, like, is $10 okay, or that. We have not opined as to that, because I think it's very, taking into account what they're charging for, have they made the categories. But generally speaking, as long as you're, aligning with the HIPAA right of access and their reasonable fees, you would be okay in that instance. But if it's not a patient, there's, again, a lot of specificity both in the reg text and in the preamble discussion of those provisions as to, what criteria you can use and what fees are excluded. So please keep that in mind. Tom?
Okay, Mike, thanks. So we've talked about content and manner, and we've talked about infeasibility, and we've talked about fees. Let's talk about the fourth exception that we wanted to discuss today, namely licensing. So the first is an example near and dear to my heart. Let's say that I'm a rural radiology practice, and I get referrals from physicians all over a large catchment area. And many of these physicians would like access, the ability to see these images. And we contain the images on a web-based PAC system that we have to pay for. And if we want to give seat licenses to the requesting physicians, it's going to cost us a fair amount of money for each of these licenses. Can we charge these physicians for those licenses so that they can go to a website, log on, and see their patients' images?
So thanks, Tom, for the question. I'll probably first start by, emphasizing the point at the bottom of all these slides that we said would be there, which is these cases are going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But we did want to talk about using examples, how would this potential exception apply, right? So looking at the facts that we have as provided in this question, the first thing I would mention is, so there's also the content and manner exception, right? Which allows you to get the benefit of the exception if all parties agree to whatever the license or fee is, because the licensing exception and the fees exception don't apply in those circumstances. Those exceptions only apply if you end up in the alternative manner. Then you have to be also compliant with the licensing and fees exception. But maybe you're thinking in this situation, I don't even want to have to worry about information blocking. So if I, make sure I'm consistent with the licensing exception, then no one's going to come back to me and, raise a claim of information blocking. Particularly in this case, the referring physician may be the one who does that, right? So the cost of the license, what you want to consider here under licensing, so you're allowed to charge a reasonable royalty for a license. And that includes profit. But there are specific, again, provisions, like I'll mention at least one of them, like it has to be non-discriminatory in how you approach this. So if you're giving one license to one of these referring physicians and you're changing it for other ones, that may take you out of the benefit of the exception. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're charging other fees, the fees exception and licensing exception essentially work together. So you can't double charge for the same, development, for example, development costs. You can get charged for it, but you can't double charge it under the fees and then as part of the royalty as well. So yes, you could consider it. There's not a requirement, remember, to use these exceptions. It's just something that maybe you want to do to give yourself assurances that in that instance, it's not going to be information blocking. But like I said, if there was agreement amongst the parties on market terms, you may even qualify for the content and manner exception.
Okay, so let's pivot it a little bit. Let's say that I'm not relicensing somebody else's work here. Let's say that my partners and I have built a mobile app that requires an interface to an EHR. And the EHR vendor says, well, you have to license us the source code if you want the app to be able to interface with our product. Can the EHR vendors do this?
So this was a good question in terms of trying to under the broader rubric of information blocking. So this really isn't a licensing question, because the licensing question is for the actor. And in this case, this could be any app, one doing something on behalf of the covered entity, for example, and needed to connect to the EHR, or it could be on behalf of a patient. But in those cases, you're not really licensing trying to license an interoperability element, because the interoperability element is connected to being needed to access, exchange, or use the EHI. What this is more is actually something we talked about in the rule, which is contract terms. And so if the actor here, the EHR vendor, assuming they're a developer of certified health IT, and they're covered by the information blocking regulations, we talked about essentially what are called, in legal speak, unconscionable terms, in that this would be one of them if they tried to force them to relinquish IP rights. Or even another example we gave in the rule was agreeing to indemnify the actor for acts beyond standard practice, such as gross negligence. So those type of provisions in contracts or requests could rise to a level of an interference. So I didn't want to lose this question, even though it didn't fall neatly under the licensing exception. I thought it was an important question to use for us to emphasize and call out what we said in the rule about, because this is something we heard a lot through both the comment period and leading up to even the proposed rule, these type of practices that were inhibiting access and exchange of use of EHI. So it was a good one to use to come back and emphasize that.
Okay, if it's all right, Mike, I'd like to pivot a little bit. We've talked about content and manner and feasibility, fees and licensing. Let's talk more generally about what electronic health information is, because this is what we're going to be required to share. Now, as I understand it, the regulation has provided a stepwise path towards sharing all electronic health information, and that currently only some data elements need to be shared, and these data elements are defined in the United States Core Data Set for Interoperability, or the USCDI. At some point in the future, I know we're going to have to share it all, but currently we're sticking with the USCDI. So my question for you is, if we look under this clinical notes section, it says one of the things that we currently have to share is a progress note. For the purposes of USCDI, what's a progress note?
Thanks for that, Tom. I think it was good that you talked about how you understand it, and hopefully a lot of folks who are listening today have a similar understanding. But we will tackle that with some specificity today. Particularly, I heard you say soon we're going to have to share all of it. So we're going to talk about what all of it really is, primarily on the next slide. But to your first point, which is like, hey, it's like a stepwise approach, and that's true. What we did is beyond just delaying the applicability date, we set up the definition where the definition of EHI, or at least for the purpose of information blocking, was limited to the data represented by the USCDI from the applicability date, which is April 5th of this year, all the way through October 5th of 2022. But we're only less than a year away, and on October 6th, 2022, it will be that quote unquote all EHI that we'll talk about eventually on the next slide. But for now, it is limited to that data represented by the USCDI. And we have a lot of FAQs on our website to talk about, like, it's not you have to use the standards. It's really just the elements. You keep that in mind. But then people were like, well, what is a progress note? And actually, and they've asked about other notes too. And again, there are FAQs on the website. For example, a clinical note isn't limited by the type of specialty or who the author was. So keep that in mind. And we have questions about whether, psychotherapy notes are included, which they're not. But we had a question about, whether draft clinical notes are included, and hold that one because we'll talk about it a little bit on the next slide. And there is an FAQ, so you can definitely go to that. But the newest FAQ is the one I'm getting to it, right? The newest FAQ is the one on progress notes. And there's actually a definition of what a progress note is in the USCDI version 1 that what is called incorporate by reference. And that is, a progress note represents a patient's interval status during a hospitalization, outpatient visit, treatment with an LTPAC provider, or other healthcare encounter. So any note that meets the above definition is considered a progress note for the purposes of the information blocking regulations. And I want to just emphasize that part, because those developers who certify technology under the program, there are different requirements when it comes to meeting the USCDI standard. So make sure you're aware of that. If you are a developer certified at Health IT, and you have to comply both with certification requirements and information blocking. And ultimately, this definition will probably move to your second question. So.
Sure. So since you brought it up, after the USCDI goes away, what constitutes quote unquote all electronic health information?
Right. So we issued an FAQ as referenced here that lays this out in writing. However, and I know some folks take in information differently. And so what we try to do, and I think some of it was spurred by what we saw was happening in the industry too, and just again, maybe a little bit of misconceptions too. We tried to portray this information in an infographic. So without further ado, we could probably move to the next slide. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful for everybody to get their head wrapped around what we're talking about when we're talking about EHI, and particularly, this limited time frame of USCDI, and then what all really is come October 6, 2022. And this kind of goes back to what I've been trying to say about, draft clinical notes, the focus on that, or progress note. Ultimately, it will become what would be included in the designated record set. So what electronic information would be included in the designated record set. And the key factor to that is what you see on your screen about designated record sets. And that is whether that information is used in whole or part to make a decision about individuals. So taking a step back, however you characterize that note, if it's used to make a decision about an individual, it's going to be part of the designated record set. Similarly, a draft clinical note may normally not be part of the designated record set, but if you made a clinical decision before you finalize the note based on whatever you had in that note, which maybe if it's even test results, for example, then it would become part of the record. Another thing I really want to emphasize here is the would from the EHI, the would be in the designated record set. So what that means for covered entities and business associates is there needs to be strong communication in terms of what would be included in the designated record, so that business associate also knows what information they're going to have to make available as EHI. So wanted to point that out as well. And hopefully the way this information is presented will be helpful. We're actually going to make a fact sheet available soon that will you'll be able to have to reference as well. So, Tom, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So we've talked about the exceptions, and we've talked about more broader definition of electronic health information. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions to hopefully clear up some misconceptions. First of all, does this information blocking regulation apply if a patient never requests his or her electronic health information? In other words, do patients have to ask for this information before any of this applies to me or other doctors?
So, yeah, they don't. So the answer is no in that regard. And I felt like we got a lot of questions after one FAQ, what to request. And what we really wanted to emphasize to everyone is there doesn't have to be a request. And this, again, is elaborated on in the FAQ referenced here, and it's on our website. You don't need a request to essentially initiate a claim of information blocking, or for there even to be a potential information blocking. So it's really focused on the practices and whether that practice can be an act or an omission as well. So it's not just affirmative actions, can be omissions. And there's an example in the statute of where if you just designed your health IT in certain ways, that could be information blocking, or if you implemented it also, as the example we give in the FAQ, also from the statute, if you implement it in ways that restricted access, exchange, or use, that could be information blocking. We also give another example in the FAQ about a contract provision that could materially discourage access, exchange, or use. All those could rise to a level of an interference and thus be information blocking, and there wouldn't be a quote unquote request in that circumstance. So want folks to keep that in mind. Also want them to keep in mind that omissions can be potentially implicate the information blocking regulation. So failure to exchange in certain circumstances, not complying with another law that requires access, exchange, or use are all examples of potentially implicating the information blocking regulation.
Got it. So kind of along the same lines, do physicians, hospitals, et cetera, have to make EHI available through, say, a patient portal or other means as soon as it's created? In other words, do we have to be proactive about providing this information? So
what I can tell you today is that, and this is again in that FAQ, which is really a revised one of a prior version, which is that there is no proactive regulatory concept. There's nothing codified in our regulations that requires quote unquote, something proactive to occur. Again, and I don't know if this provides any solace, but they're focused on, the information blocking regulations are focused on whether a practice constitutes information blocking and whether really does it interfere with, prevent, or materially discourage access, exchange, or use. So I think what we noted in that FAQ is what we tried to do is give some more specific guidance through a different FAQ. It was one we issued back in March, which explained where a delay in making EHI available through a patient portal or an API could constitute an interference and thus implicate the information blocking regulations. So hopefully that has been helpful to our stakeholders and actors.
It is. So what I'd like to do just for a minute here is walk away a little bit from the discussion of the exceptions and the health information and some of the misconceptions, and just try to remind everybody where the regulation came from and what its intent is. You know, my understanding is that Congress drafted the regulation and ONC implemented it really because of what we were hearing from stakeholders in the market. And the basic idea is that the patient owns their own information. And I think the legislation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I think the legislation and the regulation wanted to make sure that patients could own and control their information in an unencumbered fashion. And you know, we believe, and I think there's a good deal of literature that has demonstrated that patients controlling their information has a lot of benefits. The first obvious is that first set of bullet points is patient engagement. There's data that suggests that patients have improved outcomes when they get access to their information. Patients can also serve as the last line of defense. Hopefully we will see fewer you know, missed results that weren't communicated and that sort of thing. That can be very challenging, certainly for radiologists, but for all doctors. There's also pretty good evidence that information sharing supports care coordination. And in terms of making doctors' lives better, we hope that we get to a future where there's no more having to hunt down medical records and no more having to unnecessarily repeat tests. Finally, excuse me, there's some public health benefits. As we know right now, in order to be compliant with many CMS quality programs, we have to report on quality metrics every year. We're envisioning a future in which this can be done in an automatic fashion out of an EHR. It would also be nice to be able to find out from EHRs if, say, an infectious disease is spreading in a certain way around the country. The more liquid the data is, the more benefits that both physicians and patients and the public health establishment can have. It's our hope that liquidity will create an economy of technology that both improves patients' health and makes MD's life easier. I mean, I'm thinking about better user interfaces to existing EHRs, or we've already seen with the remote monitoring of pacers that new modes of treatment and new modes of patient engagement have come online and are paid for. So we're hoping that with the information sharing regulations that this continues apace. It's worth noting that this year we're on pace for venture funding to reach over $30 billion into digital health. That's about the same level that internet funding was in 1999. So we're very hopeful. Anyway, Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about how to report information blocking.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And we're in the home stretch now. So we just wanted to show you the essentially the user interface on our website. And there's links in the last slide how to get here. But if you wanted to ask a question about information blocking, other topics, and definitely if you wanted to report information blocking, you want to go here on our Health IT feedback and inquiry portal. So let's move to the next slide to talk a little bit about the claims process on an information blocking claim. So this is might be a little hard to see on this slide, and we've issued it as a fact sheet, so you can grab it from our website. But it really shows you what happens to that claim when it comes in. And really what we're doing is assessment based generally on what was provided by the submitter on trying to determine who the subject of the claim is. And based on who the subject is, you can see the scope of authority, which always falls with OIG pretty much in all instances, except for if it's a developer under the program. So hopefully this will also be helpful to folks to understand. And we also have another one about, how the claim gets processed. So when you get notification and so forth on our website. So hopefully that is also helping those who are submitting claims of information blocking to understand the process better. Next slide, please. So as I alluded to, here's where you can find all the information. Many past webinars on information blocking, including a 90-minute one just on information blocking and all going through all the exceptions. That one I referenced earlier for providers on the overview of information blocking from September 14th is also available there. This one that we've done today will also be available on that same webpage. It'll probably take until after the Thanksgiving holiday before it goes up. So just wanted to make you aware of that, but you'll be able to find it there. There'll be, and this isn't the end, there will be many more FAQs, fact sheets, blogs, tweets, and webinars to help inform you and educate you about information blocking. And to that point, we can go to the last slide. As a reminder, I mentioned there will be an Ask ONC again about information sharing, and that'll be held on December 10th. You can subscribe for our emails, which tell you how to register, but you can also just go directly to the website and register there. So with that concludes our presentation for today. I really want to thank you all for attending on behalf of ONC. Have a great day. Bye now.